emotions. They have violated their ability to reason. They have violated their affection, and now they're violating their intellect. And, what I think is interesting is, how many of those are there that we just looked at? Paul lists how many? 5. Now, if you want to have a little Bible study on your own, go compare those to Satan's 5 I wills and watch the connection. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, when you're violating your conscience, when you're violating your emotions, when you're violating your reasoning faculties, when you're violating your affections, when you're violating your intellect, ultimately what you're doing is you are violating the fact that, okay, let me repeat that. What you're ultimately doing is, through your pride, you're trumping God. And of course, that's exactly what Satan did, right? That's what he did. And so now, what Paul now goes into as he's starting to explain, hey, listen, when you violate the very things that God gave you, right? Now, can you have a fallen conscience? Of course you can. Can you have fallen emotions? Well, we just spent 10 weeks talking about that, right? Can you have, if you're, the lens by which you see things? And let me touch on that for a second, too, because I do think that is something that's very critical. And really, as we move into Philadelphia now this week, as we start to look at that on Sundays in Revelation, what we're going to start to do now, as I told you, those first 5 kind of are a separation of the last 2. The last 2 now is Philadelphia and Laodicea. Remember what I've been trying to tell you all along, right? What you're going to see in church history, and I promise you this is going to make sense in a minute. What you see throughout church history is you see 2 lines develop, right? The one that came out of Antioch, the one that came out of Alexander, okay? And then when you get to the end of church history of Jesus is writing those letters, it's almost like Philadelphia, he's writing the letter to Antioch, and then to Laodicea, he's writing to Alexandria. And he is. You're going to see that. I'm going to show you how that all kind of works together here, because something very interesting you're going to find in Philadelphia. There's no condemnation. Then there's something really interesting you're going to find in Laodicea. There's no commendation. Okay? So bingo, there you go. You see the end result of which line you follow. But here's the thing that I want you to get, okay, because this is going to be very relevant to what we're talking about. If you follow the line of Alexandria, your ability and your lens of how you view Jesus, the Bible, all that goes with that is very, very different than if you follow the line of Antioch. You're viewing it through a different lens. Do you understand what I mean when I say that? Okay, you're seeing things differently. And because you see things differently, your interpretation is going to be different. Okay, now I know this. Again, I'm not very smart, but I think I know this. 2 things that are different can't be the same. Okay, so something's up there. There's something very different about those 2 different things. Okay, and it becomes our responsibility, truthfully, okay, to recognize and realize which one is right. Now, that of course is on the assumption that you even take God and His Bible seriously, because there's always a third thing going on in all of that. Right? That's just the 2 lines of quote-unquote Christianity, okay? But there's always the third line, which is, the unsaved. The ones that don't, okay, so that's a different ballgame altogether. Obviously, then, that line of people are viewing things from their lens. You understand? Okay? And so now you have what Paul's talking about here, and especially when it comes to this, again, because you really got to make sure you understand what the book of Romans is really all about, right? Especially the first 8 chapters is the book of salvation. That's what it's the doctrine of salvation. If you truly want to understand salvation, then man, this is where you go. You go to the first 8 chapters of Romans. Here's where Paul is laying out the doctrine of salvation. Okay, and by the way, with that being said, but he switches gears from 9 to 11. Now, where the Calvinists messes up, okay, is they think that he hasn't switched gears. And that's why they run to chapter 9 to try to push their agenda. But no, there's a very definitive change of what Paul's doing is he's very, very distinctly going from the message to the Gentile to the message to the Jew from 9 to 11. Okay? And then 12 to 16, the final 4 chapters, 5 chapters, I guess, of Romans, then what he's doing is he's, just like he does in all of his church epistles, he's taking all the doctrinal and turning it to practical. Okay, now this is how you take everything I just talked about and how we turn it to practical, okay, within the church. All right, but listen, what lens you see the Bible from matters. Okay, so let's put aside the Alexandria and the Antioch lens. Let's just now, for the sake of argument, just say the Christian lens. Okay, and then you have a Christian lens, and then you have a non-Christian lens. Okay, so we might, a lot of, in the secular realm, the way that they would call that is what's your worldview? I'm sure you've heard that all before, right? Okay, what's your worldview? Your worldview is going to be dependent on how you see things. Makes sense, right? Of course it does. Okay, now, what Paul's doing here, because God knows what he's doing, he's attacking all the different levels of how you get to your worldview. And saying, hey, listen, if your conscience, your emotions, your reasoning faculties and your affections and your intellect is all messed up, then your worldview is going to be messed up. And of course, that would be true, right? So what is the result of having a messed up worldview, if you will? Okay? Well, look at verse 23, right? They change the glory of God into an image made like to corruptible man. All right, so let's make sure we understand what he's saying, okay? So look at the verse. And change the glory of the uncorruptible God, because God's uncorruptible, amen, into an image made like corruptible man. And then he lists the birds and the 4-footed beasts and the creeping things. And the reason why he's doing that is because he's wanting to make sure you understand that what he's talking about is physical. Okay? That's what he's talking about. And what he's saying is what man does when their ability to be able to get their conscience seared, their emotions are all out of whack, their reasoning faculties, okay, when all those are out of whack, the reason why they got out of whack is because man became what? The what? The final authority. And that's what he's saying there. What he's saying is, listen, they changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into the image made like corrupt. In other words, corruptible man becomes smarter than God. And then it becomes all about me. See what happens here? Somewhere along the line, we think, okay, that we are smarter than God. And the reality is, we're not, okay? And so what follows are the 3 results of those 5 steps away from God. So they change the glory of God into an image like corruptible man. And so we're going to start talking about this in the Philadelphian period, okay? Do you know what they call that? When man thinks that they are the center of the universe. It's humanism. And it became very popular near the end of the Philadelphian period. Hey, I'm just trying to explain to you, okay, from a church history perspective on Sundays, but from a biblical perspective, as we look through Romans, hey, this is the problem. Humanism is a major, major problem. So then they changed the truth of God and made it to a lie. Look at verse 25. Who changed the truth of God into a lie. So what happens is, okay, when humanism starts to become your worldview, okay, now you're going to deny biblical truth. That's what you're going to do. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. I can sit here and show you all day long what the Bible says, and you ain't going to care. Don't matter. Why? Because you deny God. See, your conscience has been seared. Your emotions are all out of whack. Your reasoning faculties are messed up. Your ability to see is messed up because your heart's darkened and your intellect has been violated. So you think you're smart, but you can't see what's right in front of you. You understand? And so this is what Paul's trying to get at. And then he says here, you know, the intended sexual use of the human body. Look at verse 26. For this cause, okay, because of all these things that Paul just talked about, okay, for this cause God gave them up unto vile affections. But I know the Bible doesn't condemn homosexuality. Of course it doesn't. Really? Well, what the heck is he talking about here then? Okay, look. For even their women did change their natural use into that which is against nature. Okay, no doubt what he's talking about. Like that doesn't take a genius to get this in reality. And ultimately, what Paul is saying is that it's a corruption of God's natural order. That's what happens. So what we have here in these verses in Romans chapter 1 shows the wisdom of men. And then when you go to Corinthians, Paul illustrates this between man's wisdom and that of God's wisdom. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 2, right? Verse 11 of 1 Corinthians 2:11 says, for what man knoweth the things of a man, save little s, the spirit that's inside man. We're not talking about the Holy Spirit. We're talking about man's inner spirit, which is in him. Even so, the things of God knoweth no man, but the Spirit of God. And so what Paul's trying to say is, listen, when you are seeing things with the worldview perspective of humanism, you don't have the Spirit of God inside of you. And if you don't have the Spirit of God inside of you, if you keep going in 1 Corinthians 2, what he's going to tell you is that's the natural man. They're not born again. They're a natural man. And what's the problem with a natural man? They cannot discern the Bible. You understand? And so that tells us some things that we need to take a serious note of. And I'm not trying to be funny. I'm trying to lay down some truth here and to get our brains thinking about it. Okay, so if I'm going to buy a Christian book off of a bookshelf, okay? All right. Now, here's the first thing that I'm going to ask. Is the writer of the Christian book actually a Christian? I mean, you do know that just because someone claims to be a Christian doesn't mean they are. We know that, right? We understand that, right? Because I'm not so sure this world knows that. Just because someone claims to be a Christian doesn't mean they are. Listen, if they're coming, this is why history is so important. If they're coming from the perspective of that Alexandrian worldview, what do you think is going to come in those words that they're writing? Are they truly born again? I don't know. What I will tell you is, though, there'll be signs. There'll be signs in what they're writing. You're going to look at things and go, oh, wait a minute. Give you an example, okay? So somebody, pretty big pastor here in the Jacksonville area, right? This week, he did actually, I think it wasn't this week, but I caught wind of this, and it was a video that he did on a podcast, okay? And in this podcast, it is as blatant as possibly can be that the dude's Calvinist. 5-point Calvinist. Like, he is all in for Calvinism, okay? And he leads a very popular church in the Jacksonville area. A lot of churches, and a lot of people go to his churches. But he doesn't call himself Calvinist, and you won't see it on the front of their church name, okay? Instead, we got a nice little number for the time we meet, right? That's how we roll, okay? Now, listen, but bro is a popular Calvinist, okay? Just listen to him. And I knew he was when I listened to all of his sermons, but this is blatant, he said it, okay? Now listen, here's the issue, okay? Now, is he saved or not? That's between God and him, I suppose, okay? But what I will say is, okay, it's coming out in his sermons. It's coming out in what he's teaching. It's coming out on his view of the Bible, because his view of the Bible is coming from the Alexandrian way. You understand? Okay, so now the question becomes, and I understand what I'm saying, but I do think it's important. Okay, the question becomes: is somebody like that? Are they preaching a true gospel or not? Now, if you were to look at Calvinism, okay, they will say that if somebody, I literally have heard them say it, popular Calvinists, big John MacArthur's of the world, all these guys, they will literally say that unless you are a 5-point Calvinist, you are not someone who understands the gospel of Jesus Christ, and you cannot be saved. Well, I'm not saved then. I'm done. Because I'm a 0-point Calvinist. Okay? I don't believe any of it. I think it's all trash. Okay? So now, that's why I said, you see, which worldview, which side of the fence are you on? Are you going to go the Antioch way, or are you going to go the Alexandrian way? All right? And here's my contention. They both aren't right. Someone's wrong. Somebody's wrong. And what the sad reality is what's coming out of that is confusing all the other ones. Because they can't figure, they're not even Christian. They can't figure, or even claim to be, they can't figure. So now they're just like, well, I don't want nothing to do with any of this. This is all a bunch of junk. And you know what? I get why they would say that. I used to do it. Okay? But here's the thing. This is what I know. That's another gospel than what I preach. Now, either I'm preaching it wrong or they're preaching it wrong. But Galatians 1 says, if one comes preaching another gospel than which we preached unto you, let them be accursed. So either y'all better walk out this door as quick as you possibly can, because what I'm preaching is accursed, or that Antiochian way is accursed, or that Alexandrian way is accursed. Y'all with me? Now, I said all that to say, now just think about it now. But if you are following the Alexandrian way and you write a Christian book, what's the possibilities that there's problems? 99.99999% of people that would claim Christianity have no idea what I'm talking about right now. Wouldn't have a clue. They'd walk into a bookstore and just find a good book that's Christian. They'll go home with it. They'll read their Jesus Calling and think it's the greatest book on planet Earth when it is the absolute most despicably devilish book on the planet Earth. But they'll love it and they'll think it's great. You know, and the purpose-driven church and the purpose-driven what is it? Life. They'll think this stuff is. We got to get back to the real way of. Yeah, okay. What lens are you seeing it from? What lens are you seeing it from? Because if you're seeing it from the wrong lens, then what you're getting out of those books is garbage. And you have to understand something. They don't mean the same things we mean by the words that are being said. That's a big deal. That's a very big deal. And so what happens is, now here's my contention. As I look at a verse like this in 1 Corinthians 2, okay? Well, if verse 14 says, but the natural man receiveth not the things of the spirits of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. So, here it is, my friends, and it may sound like that's what I'm saying, so I just want to make sure that I say, yes, that's what I'm saying. If you follow the Antiochian way, either you are a Christian, because you see the Bible with the right view, or it's not. And if it's not, then all those that follow that way are spiritually discerned, because it's a different gospel. And if it's a different gospel and you can't get saved, then you don't got the Holy Ghost inside of you. And you are spiritually discerned. And so, if you follow the Alexandrian way, same thing applies. Y'all with me? That's why, number one, I cannot unite with that. Two things that are different are not the same. Okay? So that's why I will not unite with that. Okay? If I'm wrong, then they're right. And hey, I'm not saying I can't be wrong. That's for you all to decide. Okay? But at the same time, if I'm right, then they're wrong. And that divide is a lot bigger than people think. It's a huge. Who's the ones that are going to be worthy and walk with him in white? It's either the Alexandrian way or the Antiochian way. Which one is it? To me, church history proves it out very, 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 very blatantly which one's right and which one's wrong. But a lack of understanding church history is a lack of understanding what is the actual right way. I'm going to tell you right now that most people that follow that Alexandrian way in these last days, okay, their ability to understand church history, if they even understand church history at all, their ability to understand church history only goes as far back as the Protestant Reformation. That's as much as they know. And if you just go back to the Protestant Reformation as your ability to understand church history, I promise you, you're doomed. You failed. Because you're going to think Luther, you're going to think John Calvin and all those boys, these guys are awesome. They were great. These were the best. The reformers, these guys are great. No, they were not. No, they were not. They were, I would say that they made things even more dangerous. Because now the distinction wasn't so obvious. Y'all with me? And listen, since 1500s, when all that Protestant Reformation started happening to where we are today, y'all know that board I got over there. I got all the list of the stuff on that left-hand side. Do note that all of those denominations, that's the Alexandrian way that came out of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, they aren't going to say that they are out of the Roman Catholic Church. They aren't going to say that. They're Protestants. Amen, we're Protestant. Okay, the problem is their doctrine still is. It still is. My question is, okay, are they preaching the same gospel that I'm preaching? Because I don't think they are. At the end of the day, that is the final. If Satan is going to mess with something, do you think Satan gives a darn about when the rapture of the church is and when you think the rapture of the church is? Do you think he cares about that? Do you think he cares about when you think the second coming is? Do you think he cares about that? He don't care about any of that stuff, okay? However, he is using that because the seeds of it flow to somewhere. And the seeds of it always flows to what is the most important thing. What is that? Salvation. And you go, oh, what's the second coming have to do with salvation? Everything. What does the rapture of the church have to do with salvation? Everything. So that's why when people say, as the Roman Catholic Church is calling for right now, we need to put aside our petty differences and rally around the essentials. Okay, but here's the problem. I don't even agree with your essentials, let alone the petty differences. Forget about who decides what's essential and what's not. I just think that if it's in the Bible, it's essential. Okay? But let's just put that aside for a second. I think this is bigger than people think. Look, when the Bible says, right, that in the last days, perilous times are going to come. Where? In the church. When it says that, where is the perilous times? Okay, but if it's in the church, but then who is that? See, the problem is, right, it's never what? It's never us. It's always everybody else. Okay, but it can't be. It's somebody. Somebody they have a form of godliness denying the power thereof. Somebody does. Somebody's doing that, right? And I just think we're in a lot bigger problem than people think. And we're not brothers and sisters like people think. I read Matthew 7. Many are going to say to me in that day, listen, all I know is when I go read over there in 1 Corinthians 10 and he talks about many, it was everybody but two. You understand what I'm saying? I'm not saying that there's only two Christians on the planet Earth, but what I'm saying is, I think there's a lot of problems. And I think the ultimate issue is, right, which gospel are you really believing in? Listen, if you think that the church you go to can save you, you're in trouble. Okay? If you think that the Calvinism and the way that Augustine taught it is the true gospel of Jesus Christ, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. And do you understand how many churches I just called out? I don't think you do. If you think that you can receive the gifts of the apostles, Pentecostalism, so that's a different gospel, my friends. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that all those people in all those churches can't be saved. I didn't say that. What I'm saying is, if they're following that doctrine, they can't be saved because those doctrines are wrong. Those are different gospels. This is a bigger problem than we think. It really is. And I don't mean to be ugly about it, but what I have always thought and what I've always believed is I can do nothing for nobody on that side. now's the time that something can happen. Now's the time to get it right. Because once we get to the other side, it's over. Now your destiny is sealed. And there's nothing anybody's going to be able to do about it at that point. That's why I think it's so important to stand up for it now. Because you're not going to get them all. But man, maybe you'll get one. Maybe you'll get two. And get them out of the system that I believe is absolutely 100% wrong. And if you're looking at, if somebody is spiritually discerned, do you really want to hear them teach you the Bible? Anybody? I don't. That's why I'm very, very selective about the people I listen to. That's why I'm very, very in the know for whatever book I'm about to read. Now, that's not to say I won't read a book from the other perspective, because I like to see what is going on there. But I know going into that book, I need to be guarded right now, because there's going to be a lot of stuff in this book that's going to sound great, but it's not, okay? And I would even argue that that's a little bit of dangerous ground, okay? But I'm just telling you, just because something claims to be Christian does not mean it is. And I would argue that 95% of the books that are sitting on bookshelves today that claim to be Christian, you better watch out. You better be really careful. Because in my humble opinion, that's garbage. I'd throw that in the trash as quick as I possibly can, and I'd light a fire to it. Just telling you this. Well, I mean, you do what you want. Okay, you're going to have to answer to them. I'm just telling you. As your pastor, I'm just telling you, be careful. The junk out there, the devil's very subtle, very tricky, and he's very good at doing what he's doing. Listen, the natural man can know only that of the Spirit of man. The things of God can only be discerned by the Spirit of God. So what happens is, right? What happens is, so let's just think about this for a second. Let me give you an example of this, right? So Westcott and Hort. Who knows who Westcott and Hort is? Raise your hand. All right, good. Let me explain to you who Westcott and Hort is, okay? They are the two gentlemen that made the movement, probably 1885, made the movement to get rid of the vile King James Bible, okay, and bring about this new Greek translation of the New Testament that they called the Greeks' Nestle New Testament, that came from Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. These are the guys who did it. If you read their beliefs and what they thought, they were Roman Catholic through and through, okay? And they saw it through the lens of Alexandria. Okay. Now, again, you got to make this determination of which way you think's right. But if what I'm saying is right, and I'm 129% convinced that it's right, the Alexandrian way is, I'd stay away from that. That ain't good. That's bad. These are the guys that translated into the Greek New Testament that we now have today, that the NASB, the ESV, the NIV, blah, 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 blah. Those are the guys who did it using the Bible. Okay, I don't think those guys were even saved, let alone anything else. Based on what I just read right there, if they're not saved, then they're spiritually. You want those guys to be the ones to give you what God really said? You want spiritually discerned individuals to be the ones that to tell you what God really said? Are you going to put your trust and faith in that? You do what you want. I'm not. No thanks. I'll pass. Just telling you guys. But the problem is, how many people heard that for the first time in their whole life tonight? You never heard something like that before about Westcott and Hort. Be honest. Raise your hand. Because that is the problem. Most people in the world that would call themselves Christians have no idea what I just said. No clue. They walk into a bookstore. The person at in the bookstore will go, "Oh, you looking for a Bible? Yeah. Hey, what are you looking for? I'm just looking for something easy to read." "Oh, the NIV. That's a pretty popular one. Everyone seems to buy that one. Why don't you buy that one?" That's how they're choosing their Bibles. Or, "Hey, I go to so-and-so church. They use this Bible. I'll get that Bible." No clue. No clue what's behind it. No clue what's going on. And frankly, they probably don't even care. They really don't. And if you try to say something, remember? You try to say something, they look at you like you're the weirdo, you're the crazy one, mind your own business. I was just trying to save you from hell, but hey, I'll mind my own business. Go ahead. I was trying to help you out of the pit of the devil's hell, but go ahead. I'll just mind my own business. I'm the cult. Because, if you're a KJV only believer, you do know you're part of the KJV only cult, right? You do know that, right? I just want you to know that, right? Now, who would be propagating something like that? What you're going to learn in the Philadelphia period? Okay? Remember how I just told you? All right. We just got out of Sardis. Now you're going to look at the Church of Philadelphia, which there's no condemnation. By the way, you want to know how Jesus starts out the Church of Philadelphia? It's me who holds the key of David. And if you're in the know, and you know about the key of David, because we spent about 12 or 13 weeks talking about that. If you know what that is, okay, then you're going to know that those 10 keys of Bible study is all part of the key of David. Do you understand that the Philadelphian period is when the church saw some of the greatest movements of missionary movements the world's ever seen? The list goes on. Why? Because those boys got the right Bible in their hands and the light turned on. And my gosh, it just exploded. And all the things that happened during the time of Philadelphia from 1500 to 1900 AD, just some crazy, crazy stories of things that happened. God had a very particular piece of property he was saving that just happened to get discovered right around that time. Anybody know what that property is? America. And do you know that America is the only country in the world that can make the statement that they were never Roman Catholic? We were never Roman Catholic. There's only one state in all of America that the Roman Catholicism got their hands on. Anybody know what state that is? Maryland. It's the only one. All right, well, we're going to learn all that in Philadelphia. What I'm trying to tell you is, but you look at that Philadelphian period, facts are a stubborn thing. You look at that Philadelphian period of time from roughly 1500 to roughly 1900 AD, and you look at all the great things that Jesus talks about. Those were the people that had the key of David. Do you understand that there was only one Bible that was being used? And do you understand which one it was? Huh? Say it. Facts are a stubborn thing. It's the only one. There was no NASB. There was no NIV. None of that stuff was going on. Then you get to Laodicea, 1900, to where we are now. And that's the church that has no what? Common. It's only being. And do you understand what happened in 1901? That started the downhill spiral of all the English translations. See, what happened in Philadelphia is the light got turned back on for the first time in 1,500 years. And for almost almost 350 years, it was the only one, okay? And do you know what happened in 1901? In Laodicea, where it's all about the light, got turned off again. And that's where we are, my friends. And because we're living in a period of time where the light's been turned off, I'd be very, very wary about who you put your ear to. Be very careful. Because just because someone's claiming to be Christian, if you don't have the Spirit of God inside of you, if you didn't go to the left and get lit by the Spirit, and all you did is go right, what are you in? And if you don't think that's serious, then don't worry about anything I just said. Just call me for what most people would say right now. You're a heretic. You're a this, you're a that, you're a cult. All the good things they'll say about me. And that's great. That's fine. Listen, I was borderline atheist. When I started to study this stuff, I took this stuff seriously because I need to know answers. And I am very, very thankful that the Lord turned the light on so I could see the answers. And that's why I say, listen, I will promise you, I don't care. I will tell you right now, you will probably never meet a pastor or a Bible teacher who will say that this book's not the final authority. They'll all say it. Right? They'll all say it. Okay. I got a question, Mr. Calvinist. If this book's the final authority, then how come when it says, for God so loved that he gave his only begotten son, is it the final authority or are you the final authority? Because you know what? You're saying, well, that's not really what God meant. What he really meant is he so loved the elect. That's really what he meant. If that's what he meant, that's what he would have wrote. You understand that? You're saying that the Bible's the final authority, but it's not. Because you're correcting the Bible with your theology. And all I can say is you do what you want to do. Me? No thanks. I'm running. Bible's not the authority to you. You're the authority. And I'm just telling you, that's what they do. There is literally probably 7 or 8 verses I can think of off the top of my head right now. It talks about how it's the will of God that all men be saved. See, but in Calvinist thinking, it's not all men, it's just the elect. Well, then why didn't he say that? Why didn't he say it's the will of God that the elect be saved? He said all. Okay. That's what he said. All right. So I'm just telling you. Just because someone says that this book's the final authority, start asking questions. And you'll find out real quick whether it's the final authority or not. If you think the kingdom of God and the kingdom of heaven are the same thing, this book's not the final authority. Whatever theology you've been taught is the final authority. I'm probably one of the only people, okay, I don't want to say that. That's probably not fair. But there's something very significantly different about my studies. Okay? Because the first probably 6 years of my study, I was not being influenced by a Bible teacher or a church. I wasn't. And I did that on purpose. I didn't know it was going to take that long. Okay, what I did is ask my wife, she can tell you. What I did is I just took the Bible and studied it. And I drew out maps on Excel files, and I looked at every single verse, and I just mind mapped every single verse in the whole Bible. I had the Excel files at home to prove it. Yes? Some of you have seen it. Some of you have seen it. Okay? That's what I did. So I'm just telling you, okay? Now, when I came out of that, listen, I'm not saying that I knew everything and I was great, and no. But what I'm saying is I had some pretty good ideas of what the Bible said. And I will tell you this, man, I did not walk away from that going, oh, man, God picks and chooses who he wants to be saved and doesn't. That's crazy. No, you've got to be taught that. That's a theological system that someone has to teach you to come to that conclusion. Mark Trotter used to say it like this, and it always resonated with me because I really identified with it, although I've never been on a desert island all by myself, but I kind of felt like that's where I was. You know, if you gave someone a KJV Bible and you stranded them on a desert island for 3 years, they are not going to walk away with the understanding of Calvinism. And by the way, by a Calvinist's own mouth, then that person can't be saved. So you could have a KJV Bible sitting in a desert island all by yourself for 3 years, and if you don't come to the conclusions of Calvinism, you can't be saved. I'm sorry. There's too many other verses that strike me and go, that's wrong. No way. That's not even possible. For whosoever calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Is that what it says? For whosoever. Is that just the elect, or is that anybody that chooses it? Come on. Help me. Of course it is. All right. Chris, we'll pick up next week. I got some other things I want to talk to you about the changing the glory of God into the image of God, but we'll pick that up next week. Go ahead, buddy.